Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing my predictions of the Stanley Cup playoffs of this season with the new proposed format. As of this recording, it hasn't been confirmed yet. There's a pretty good chance there's going to be a 2014 format for the 2020 Stanley Cup playoffs this year with 12 teams in each conference instead of 8, meaning that Columbus, Montreal, Florida, the Rangers on the East will squeeze in, and in the West it would be Arizona, Minnesota, Chicago, and Winnipeg. So the first series would be a 3 out of 5, and then the rest would be a 4 out of 7. So I'm going to start with Toronto versus Columbus. I think Toronto's going to win this one. I just feel that their firepower is just too strong here. And Columbus lost Panarin and Bobrovsky in the offseason. And even though Merzlikins has been pretty solid for them, I still think that they can manage to lose to Toronto, since I feel they don't have the depth or the star power to make it through there. Next up, Pittsburgh versus Montreal. For me, it is a little bit of a tough one because we know that when Carey Price gets hot, he can really steal some games. But to me, even though I'm a Habs fan, it's just really too hard to bet against Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin and Chris Letang, especially considering they just won 3 Stanley Cups together and 2 in a row. So I'm going to take Pittsburgh there to face Philadelphia in the next round. Next, we have the Islanders and the Panthers. For me, I feel like the Islanders for the last couple of years have been overachieving. I think the Panthers are just a better team, especially with their offseason additions. Like Sergei Bobrovsky, even though he hasn't really been very good. Like Price, he himself could steal some games. And the Islanders really haven't proven much. They haven't really improved either. They lost Tavares a couple of years ago, but that didn't really seem to affect them. Still, I'm going to pick the Panthers here, and I'll say it'll go the limit to 5 games. But it's going to be close, but I think it's going to be Florida. In the next series, Carolina versus New York. I think this is going to be another close one, especially if Igor Shesterkin for the Rangers is healthy, which I believe he will be, recovering from his car accident that happened a little bit after the trade deadline. And so if Shesterkin's any good, or is as good as he was to begin with, I feel he can steal some games from Carolina. I also think this series is going to go all 5 games, but I'll have to go with the Canes here in 5, just because their defense I find is too good, and Sebastian Aho and Teuvo Teravainen are 2 decent options on offense as well. Next, I'll go to the West for round 1, Calgary versus Winnipeg. To me, this is going to be another close one, but I just feel like Calgary doesn't have that playoff mentality at all. Whereas Winnipeg a couple years ago got to round 3 and unfortunately lost to Vegas. So, yeah, Winnipeg for me is going to win this one. And I think it's going to be pretty convincingly. In 3 or 4 games, there might be a sweep. I just don't see Calgary making it far at all in these playoffs. Next round becomes Edmonton versus Chicago. And this is another tough one, right? Because I like McDavid a lot. I like Draisaitl. That's a big 1-2 punch. And Chicago is the 12th seed, right? So they're the last team to make the playoffs. Unfortunately, I just think that, they've won 3 cups together, Taves and Crawford and Kane. And playoff Kane is just really something else. Duncan Keith, Brent Seabrook, I know they might be a little bit washed up. But to me, this series is going to go to Chicago in probably 4 games. It's going to end 3-1. So Edmonton gets eliminated and their playoff woes continue. Vancouver and Minnesota. Vancouver hasn't made the playoffs in a little bit. I didn't expect them to this year, but they've surprised. Minnesota on their end, they just never been able to produce in the playoffs. I think I'll just have to go with Vancouver here, just for the simple fact of Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes, and obviously Markstrom's elite Vezina season, to me, is going to be more than enough to go past Minnesota. I'd bet on a sweep in 3 games or maybe 4. I don't see this going all the way. Next, Nashville and Arizona. Arizona, to me, is just, they have no business being in the playoffs. I mean, neither do Montreal or Chicago. But Arizona, to me, is just a bad team that overachieved in the beginning of the year. They got a little bit over themselves by acquiring Taylor Hall, and it started to bite them now. Now at least they have Hall for the playoffs. But I still don't see them being any good at all. I say Nashville in 3, sweep completely. And the reason for that is just Nashville. I don't know why they just haven't been good this year. Rene's been pretty mediocre, but playoff Rene is just too good right now, as the urinating tree would say. And I also just am a firm believer in Forsberg and in Yossi. All around, the team is just better, and Arizona, to me, I just don't see them competing at all. Next, round 2. Boston versus Toronto. Going back to the East. Boston for sure. Boston just always beats Toronto. I don't see it being any different this year. It's not like Toronto has drastically improved. I guess you could say they got Barry, but they also lost Kadri, even though they didn't really have Kadri for the playoffs last season because of his suspension, which is probably the reason why they dealt him. But to me, just Tyson Barry, I don't think it's going to make a difference against the Bruins team that's even stronger this year than it has been in years past. So Boston wins here and advances to, well, what would normally be round 2, but in this case it's round 3. Next, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, the Battle of Pennsylvania. That's always going to be a good series. It's going to be a good rivalry. It always is. Every game, Philadelphia-Pittsburgh is just an incredible game. It's always fun to watch on TV. I think this series is going to go all the way. It's just two teams that, to me, are evenly matched. Philadelphia has surprised some people this year. So I'm really not sure who's going to win this one. But I think I'm just going to have to go Pittsburgh here. Again, for the same reason as in round 1. Crosby, Malkin, in the playoffs, they're just really, really good. I did just realize that they got swept by the Islanders in round 1 last year. I don't see that happening this year. If everyone's well rested and all, to me, just Crosby and Malkin have the advantage over a lot of teams. And Philly's one of Philly's one of them, considering they just don't have much playoff experience. Next, the Battle of Florida. Tampa versus Florida, the Panthers. Tampa's just an incredible team. They always have been. But they haven't really been a good playoff team lately. Even though they did reach the conference finals in, I think, 2015, I think they reached the Stanley Cup finals against Chicago, yeah. But it's just, they're not a very good playoff team. Although it's just really tough to bet on them. So I'll have to go Tampa here in 4 against the Panthers. I do like the Panthers, but to me, they're just no match for Point and Stamkos and the Tampa Bay Lightning. Next, we have Washington and Carolina. That was a series last season. That was round 1. And Carolina surprised by winning. They ended up going to the Eastern Conference Finals, which continued to surprise. The bunch of jerks continued. But this year, I feel like the whole bunch of jerks mentality, it's not there this year. And Washington has just been very, very good. And it's hard to bet against Ovi. And even though they beat them last year, I feel like this series is going to go to 6 or 7 as well. It's going to be a close series. But I have to go with Washington on this one. Next, back to the West on top, St. Louis and Winnipeg. To me, it's going to be another close series. St. Louis, if I'm not wrong, did beat Winnipeg in en route to winning the Stanley Cup last year. And I think St. Louis has a very, very good hockey team. So I'm going to go with St. Louis here against Winnipeg in 6 or 7 games. It's going to be a close one, but to me, St. Louis just has the edge for the simple reason of they won the Cup last year, and that always gives you a little edge in the playoffs. Next, Dallas and Chicago. A lot of people are surprised probably that Edmonton wouldn't make it this far. I don't have them making it this far. I just think that Chicago isn't going to be a match for Dallas because they just have a great defense. In real life, they have a great defense, and they have good offensive players as well. Their offense just hasn't been producing as you would want it to produce, right? Sagan and Ben, they just haven't been producing very well. Although I still think Dallas is going to win this one in 6 or 7 games. Probably 7, even though Chicago performs very, very well in the playoffs. I just see Dallas winning this one. Colorado and Vancouver. Colorado easily. No contest here. I just think McKinnon, Rantanen, and Landeskog are too good for Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes and Markstrom. Uh, Makar as well is just going to be a huge part of this run. I see Colorado going a pretty long way here. So I think Colorado is going to win the series in 5. Next, the final series of round 2, Vegas and Nashville. I think the series is gonna go 7 games. It's gonna be a very very close series. I personally am not a big Vegas fan. I don't really like the team. I still believe that Nashville's gonna win this one in 7 games. It's gonna be very close. Although I just see Nashville winning it, I don't know why. Vegas in the playoffs, in their first year, they surprised a lot of people. But last year, some people might say they got screwed. They probably did. With that penalty, but you still shouldn't give up 4 goals on 1 power play. That's on you. Um, so Nashville's gonna win this one in 7. So back to the East now. We have Boston against Pittsburgh here for not round 1 but in round 3. It's gonna be another close series. I don't know if I can bet against Boston in this situation. Even though I've said that, Crosby's a clutch playoff performer with Malkin and Letang. I mean, so is Bergeron and Chara and Rask and just the rest of that Boston team. They won it in 2011, although Rask wasn't really the goalie. We've seen them make deep runs before. Boston made the Stanley Cup Finals last year. It's a very good example. So I think Boston's going to win this one in 5 or 6 games. So Boston advances to the conference finals. Next, Tampa and Washington. This is going to be a close series. It really will be. But I still just see Ovi taking over here. I don't think it's Tampa's year yet. It still isn't. Even though it probably should be by now. I think Ovechkin and Backstrom and John Carlson, his emergence is really going to help. And maybe even start Samsonov for a couple games in the playoffs. It wouldn't hurt because he's a very good goalie. And Holtby could get some rest. As we know, rested goalies tend to do better in the postseason. So I have Washington here going to face Boston in the Eastern Conference Finals. In the West, it's going to be St. Louis versus Dallas in the first one. This is going to be another very close series. This series went to Game 7 overtime last year in round 2 with Patrick Maroon scoring the game-winning goal. I wouldn't be surprised if this year it's equally as close. And I see Dallas taking it this time. Again, it's going to be a very close series. I just don't know if Binnington can hold it again the second time around in the playoffs, although it probably can't be bad. I think Sagan and Ben and Radulov and company, the Dallas offense wakes up in the postseason this year. And they make it to the conference finals again against St. Louis, who's going to be pretty disappointed to go home after failing to defend their Stanley Cup championship. Next, the last series here, Colorado and Nashville. I think this one's going 7. I'm not going to lie to you. I really do think this one's going 7. It's going to be very close. But I just have to go with the Colorado Avalanche here. They've been too good this year to not get to this point. McKinnon's been too good. Rantanen's been too good. Makar's rookie season's been too good for them to fall just short in the second round here. You can't fall in the second round in this situation, I don't think. So Avalanche make it to the Eastern Conference Finals here over Nashville. Now back to the East again. Boston, Washington, Eastern Conference Final for a berth in the Stanley Cup Final. Boston was here last year. Washington was here 2 years ago. One team lost, one team won. So maybe time for revenge for Boston and maybe time for 2 cups in 3 years for Washington. Again, another close series. Obviously, when you're in the Eastern Conference Finals or any conference final, it's bound to be a close series because it's 2 very, very good teams. Here in Boston, you have just very, very good depth all the way, along with the great goalie in Tuukka Rask. And same on the other side with Washington, along with the great goalie in Braden Holtby, and even Ilya Samsonov. And one thing that I've realized is all 4 teams here are very, very good backups. Halak and Khudobin for Dallas, they're both considered, I would consider them elite backups. Um, Avalanche maybe a little bit less with Francouz, but he's been solid this year. He's been surprising. And the Capitals obviously with Samsonov. Back to the series, I think Boston's gonna win this one in six, advance to the Stanley Cup final for the second straight year. Just because I think they're just a little bit better than Washington this year. They've demonstrated it all year. I can't see them losing to Washington, although it will be close. Next, the other conference final, Dallas and Colorado. So it's bound to be a new finalist this year, as none of these teams have been in the Stanley Cup final in well over 10 or 15 years. So it's going to be good to have a little bit of difference here from the same old. Um, and another very, very close series. It's just very hard to find the edge here, to find who has the edge. They both have a great a forward group, a forward big punch with McKinnon, Rantanen, and Landeskog on one end, and then Ben, Sagan, and Radulov on the other. I would probably give the offensive advantage to Colorado by a little bit here. Defensively, they both have some good defensemen too. Klingberg, Heiskanen, Lindell, Johns, Alexiak on one end, Sammy Gerard, Kale McCarr, Eric Johnson, Ryan Graves on the other, Ian Cole. So it's just two teams that are really, really evenly matched. I think where this series is going to be won is the goaltending and which goalie is going to be hot coming into the series. And it's hard to predict in a predictions video who's going to be hot and who isn't. But I think Ben Bishop has a higher chance of being hot. So that being said, Dallas is going to advance to the Stanley Cup final for the first time since they won it back in, I believe that was 2002 against Buffalo. So Dallas and Boston in the Stanley Cup final, that's going to be a very, very interesting matchup indeed. And now the Stanley Cup final. Boston, Dallas. 7 games, 4 wins to determine the winner. Obviously, it's going to be an extremely tight series in my perspective. I explained earlier the big punch of Dallas with Radulov and Ben and Sagan on offense, along with Heiskanen and John Klingberg and Axel Lindell on defense. And obviously the big goalie Ben Bishop, who has demonstrated that he can be pretty good in the playoffs with Tampa, leading them to Cup finals and winning a couple games while injured in 2015 against Chicago, where unfortunately he ended up losing that one. Boston's been here before. They lost here last year in 7 games. They were 1 game away from winning it. And obviously they might have revenge in their blood, so another extremely tight series for me. And it's going to be really, really tough to determine a winner here. But I think that Dallas' offseason acquisitions will be just enough to outclass the Boston Bruins for the second straight year in the Stanley Cup Finals. Joe Pavelski is going to be an integral part, I believe, of the run, as will be Corey Perry. And these aren't off-season acquisitions, but Roope Hintz, Matthias Janmark, 2 big pieces that have started to develop this year, especially Hintz. So I think that's going to be enough. That was just enough to outclass St. Louis. It was just enough to outclass Colorado. And now I feel like it is just enough to outclass the Boston Bruins and to win the Stanley Cup once and for all. The Dallas Stars, your Stanley Cup champions.